Welcome to episode 1 of Living in Recovery, a podcast devoted to sharing the stories of fellow CBP employees who are living in recovery with an addiction. The focus of this podcast is to share the experiences of those who have struggled with alcohol or drugs in the hopes of breaking the stigma that's often associated with addiction. Also, the goal of this podcast is to stimulate hope amongst those who may be struggling but are discouraged or intimidated by the prospect of seeking help. As a disclaimer, the words expressed in this podcast are based on personal experiences alone and are not meant to be taken as medical advice or to promote one method of treatment. Today, Jason shares his recovery experience and how treatment helped him to come to terms with his addiction. Jason is a Border Patrol agent, a peer support member, a master resilience trainer with CBP. Now, Jason discusses what works for him in his approach to recovery. Jason, when did you first know you had a problem with alcohol?
I think, I have to be careful when I'm asked when did I know something. Knowing kind of got me in a lot of trouble. So I think I came to the realization that I didn't like the way I felt, and I knew for certain that my solution to that was no longer serving me. And that solution for me was drinking. I don't do well with labels, but for the sake of the listeners, I have no problem referring to my malady as alcoholism. It works well. It's it's a civilian terminology that most people understand. I think I had that moment of surrender years before I actually decided to reevaluate that relationship I had with alcohol. But I have a story of recovery that has spanned over 9 years now. It's been over 9 years since I've had a drink. To say I had a drinking problem, I think it would be safer to say I had a drinking solution, and it clearly wasn't working for me anymore.
How did you know it wasn't working for you?
Well, the evidence was mounting, and I found myself in more of an emotional wasteland. And I want to pause right there for a minute because it evokes a deep, a sentiment within my heart. And you mentioned hope in the introduction, and I think it was a point of realizing that I had lost all hope. I was hopeless, and I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And it wasn't really until I had to honestly accept that I was beginning to hurt the people around me. And that's a horrible feeling when someone tells you that you're hurting me. It was maybe just the catalyst that I needed to know that my relationship with drinking wasn't as personal as I thought. Because, you develop a relationship with a solution like that, and it becomes your everything. When I no longer had the coping mechanisms in place to deal with stress or sadness, I reached out to what worked. It was like a friendship or love of my life, if you will. And like any relationship, it was scary. It was scary admitting that, it was time to seek shelter elsewhere. I'm lost in that thought because I can't really put my finger on any particular moment. It was a long battle I had, and it wasn't any exact moment in time really that made me realize. I think I could tell you that I came to a point to where I couldn't imagine being any sadder than this, and it was frightening. It was scary. So I had to, and I'm not afraid to admit either that is in that moment in time, I began entertaining other options, options A, B, and C. And I think to say I'm a suicide survivor wouldn't be a stretch because it was starting to materialize or manifest itself as a potential option. So I had to get real and get honest about is this living or are you dying? What are we going to do today? And I don't know if it was a divine intervention, but something in my heart says, I want to start living again. Yeah, and that compelled me to quit trying to do it alone, to look for somebody or look for something outside of myself, because my self will continue to fail me. And that led me to picking up the phone and trying to explore the help that's out there, and which eventually it ended up landing me in an inpatient treatment facility.
And that was 9 years ago.
Yeah, it was. Last time I picked up a drink was in June 26th, 2012. I wasn't admitted into treatment immediately. I thought, I was living under this perception that, when you need help, just hit the EAP button. The first responders will come in and sweep you away. And but that certainly wasn't my story. Not at all. I ended up having to reach out to Blue Cross Blue Shield and explore the treatment facilities that our federal insurance was willing to cover. It was painstaking trying to find a treatment facility that would take a federal law enforcement agent. But I ended up finding one. I mean, I was in treatment for 40 days. I was keeping company in there that wasn't necessarily conducive for federal law enforcement or any type of first responder when it comes to being honest about your story, about the world in which we operate in, and where we struggled in our addictions. Like I said, it wasn't perfect, but I guess it was perfect for me because it gave me a good indication of, instead of that voice saying I don't belong here, it was a pretty good indication of where I'm going to end up if I continue on this path. And my story truly wasn't any different than anybody else in there. And I affectionately say that to a lot of people that, well, I don't drink like you, Jason, but I can assure you that however you drink, I used to drink like you. These bad coping skills are developed. They're not they're not necessarily adopted overnight. It took me a long time before I realized that the things I was doing, and the people I was letting close to me, the places I was visiting, it took a long time actually to cultivate itself into something that certainly wasn't certainly wasn't a healthy way to cope with my stress.
You talked about being in the treatment facility and thinking that maybe you'd leave. When you were there, were you concerned about what would happen with your career if you left?
At that point in my life and in my journey, I'd come to the realization I was willing to put my career or any aspirations behind me, and I wasn't there because uh, I didn't decide to take that step in recovery because I wanted to salvage my career. I didn't step off on my journey of recovery because I wanted to mend relationships or become a better husband, or I was well beyond that. And that fortunately is what it took, because I had a lot of good reasons to stop drinking a long time ago, and none of those reasons could manifest the courage that was needed to finally come into a place of surrender with it. And it's been my experience working with others that if you're looking to change the way you live and the relationship you have with any type of substance misuse, unfortunately, our children and our jobs, they don't work. It's just not enough. And that's the power of addiction. And so my experience in recovery was, it wasn't a matter of hanging in there to save my job, or I wasn't being asked to attend recovery. I wasn't it was strictly voluntary, and I knew it would come with a cost. Having subjected myself to an inpatient recovery treatment program, that that doesn't. I mean, that sticks. But surprisingly, I was successful in the inpatient treatment, and I was given a good outpatient, a good plan, for success. It was quite the contrary, actually. I was fortunate enough to have some good leaders around me, not managers, but actual leaders, and they embraced that journey for me. They stood by me, and I was very fortunate to have those types of people around me. And as far as my peers, and of course, there are those that will judge. It was almost being able to carry that shame that I had let something take that much control over me, and be able to turn that around and just truly own my story and the shame and the embarrassment and all of it. There is a little bit of survivor's guilt with that. How did I lose control of my drinking and become a liability to those that are counting on me? And I guess the only way I could, digest that survivor's guilt was to just show up every day to work and be available, be be available to tell my story and perhaps be a source of hope for somebody else, and hopefully get to them before they got to the point that I found myself in. There are very few people that understood that, because towards the end, the last few years, I didn't let people get close enough to me. I no longer drank like anybody I knew, and to sit down and have a couple beers with the fellas, that didn't appeal to me anymore. And so I went inward, and it was a very lonely existence. I think sometimes as leaders, we think that, well, if their fellow agents can't see it, if they can't start to see those patterns of distress that could indicate that we may need to conduct some type of intervention here. I can assure you that there's a lot of us out there that are very good at what we do. It's a survival mechanism. And just to remember that we are honestly convinced that without this, I'm doomed. This is how I survive, because I don't have any other resources available to me. And I don't like the way I feel. And alcohol's good at changing the way you feel. Of course, it comes with consequences. But not everybody is going to outwardly express that they're having a problem with their drinking, or they're having a problem with being sad or depressed. It's a frightening place to be, and if we get alone in our minds long enough, we're going to get good at not letting anyone understand that about us, because it's a sign of weakness. We embrace this warrior culture of ours and law enforcement and first responders, and we don't do well if we think we're expressing weakness. And the last thing we want to do is to feel, excommunicated, or to feel like we're no longer being accepted. We'll go to great lengths to hide that we're having a problem. As far as treatment is concerned, I think we've done a little bit of work in that department. There's a few of us. I have a dear friend who's very close to my story and very close to my heart, and she's been out there finding facilities that are more conducive to our law enforcement culture, and they have programs specifically designed for first responders. So we have some resources now. Thank goodness, because I was in the dark, and I was just feeling my way around through that process of trying to find, the professional help that I needed. But no matter what, no matter how good the facility is, no matter how good the outpatient programs are, we'll always find a reason. We'll always find a reason why this isn't working for us, until we truly arrive at that state and truly get honest about, why am I doing this? Why do I want to quit drinking? And it has to be for you. You have to get selfish with that. It has to be about caring for you, because that's pretty much where I was lacking. That's where I ended up with alcohol as my solution. And through the process of recovery, working a good program, and I'm not a very good spokesman for a lot of what we understand to be programs of recovery. I've dipped my toes in a lot of water. But I have a program that works for me, and it includes a 12-step approach to my recovery. That's something I learned in the facilities. I learned how to give back that way. But I've also explored a lot of the other vacancies. It was just a process of learning and a process of discovering why I wasn't able to manifest anything that felt like happiness in my life. And I don't want this to sound like a sad story, because it's not. I'm here today because I want to celebrate my recovery. And I want people to know that you can manifest hope, that you're not hopeless. And none of us are excluded, especially those of us that struggle. And it is difficult. And what works for me is finding true connections, finding like minds and like hearts, people you can connect with, that can share in that struggle, that have a story that's similar, and remembering what works. Because there isn't one thing, there isn't any one magic solution to this. Because there's going to be layers, and a lot of us in the first responder and law enforcement communities, it's been my experience, I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of us have carried around some trauma, and a lot of that occurred in our childhood, and that kind of leans towards that rescuer archetype that a lot of us have. And my story goes, as long as I'm rescuing someone else, I don't have to look inward. It's a very convenient distraction for doing any real work on me. I don't have to waste time rescuing me if I'm out there saving somebody else. And until we can get our own house clean, we're not much help to anybody else. In times like this, I mean, it's unprecedented how many things are stacked against us. And a lot of the little things that I was doing, eventually, I could construct or make a design for living that was conducive to staying sober and living a life that could manifest happiness, like real happiness. A lot of those things have been tested over the last couple of years. And I found myself in situations that, a lot of roadblocks to the things I used to reach for. If it wasn't for the fact that I had that community of people that I could stay connected with, I don't know. I don't know if we'd be having this conversation today, because we have to be held accountable. No one truly is happy if you're not being held accountable. My experience only, but if I don't have layers of accountability in my design for this recovery, people that can catch you, or a practice, for example, the relationship I have with my physical self, how I connect to what I eat, how I view my health, my practice of meditation. I found my way into a yoga studio. I didn't I didn't limit myself, and when it came to some of that spiritual vacuum, I I could no longer deny. I had to explore that too. And so I brought all of these other modalities of healing, because that's really what recovery is. It's healing. It's healing what hurts. And until you're willing to do the hard work, and to have the courage to go back and find out where you still hurt, and when you're reaching for a substance to make it stop hurting, you really become void of feelings, because that's what we're scared of. And right now, the temperament within our agencies, our mission is being tested and being reevaluated daily. All of the things that seemed normal in our mission on the border with the pandemic, all of these structures are being flexed. And if it wasn't for those things that I have already put in place that could catch me when one of them failed, because they're all subject to fail. And if I didn't have those things in place to keep catching me, it would be setting myself up for a drink. The human connection should never be undervalued. And it requires some amount of vulnerability, though, to reach out and explore other modalities of healing what hurts. I guess if I could implore anything on somebody that might think they want to reconsider their relationship with alcohol, or any of the other short-term solutions out there, it would be to just know that you're not alone. You don't have to go it alone. There are people out there, whether different backgrounds or different careers, but we all share in that common struggle. And there's strength in that. There's real strength in that. And you can manifest hope again. But man, I can tell you from my own experience, just being still very connected to the agents in the field, it's often a common denominator. When we really start to destruct a lot of these suicides, there's always seemingly a component of substance misuse. And it's not just one thing. Just because someone's career is being threatened, or perhaps a marriage is being tested. It's never just one thing. And I could say the same for, addiction. Once you start to unpack it and start doing the work, it's a it's not a fun journey at all times, but it sure feels good when you're willing to address some of those things that are hurting you, and you get them out there into the light of your awareness, and just let them be. Let someone else carry that stuff. We've been carrying it too long, and it just feels really good, the levity of it, to be able to do the work. And you need a period of sobriety. You need that clarity, and you need to get around people that understand the process and are willing to get vulnerable with you, willing to have that courage. It'll make everything else, as far as the career is concerned, a lot of that stuff just takes care of itself. But you need to learn how to care for you. And that's one thing us in law enforcement, we're not very good at. It's one of the skill sets that's not taught to us. And I'm seeing some change in that direction with some of our resiliency programs. And I hope we continue to get buy-in on that. And there's some really good people out there that want to do good work. And there's resources out there. We just need to get the word out. And we need to get these programs out into the light and let people know that there's hope and there are paths. There's paths for them to find their own solutions.
As a supervisor, if somebody came to you today and said, I have a problem, I think I'm drinking or taking drugs, what do I do? How would you help them?
That, of course, would require me to operate from a place of love. I use the word. It's not an opportunity for me to hand them a list of resources for EAP, or that's a situation that would require me to just be present and maybe for the first time listen with my heart. It would require courage, and there is no wrong way to do that. It would be an honor that somebody that worked for me chose me, and I wouldn't take that for granted. I think what that individual would want to hear from me the most is that I'm grateful that you had the courage to tell me this, and I don't know what to do. I don't know where we go from here. And this is coming from someone who has a story of recovery. This is someone who has found solutions that work and has been working that program for 9 years. And I would still feel compelled to tell that individual, I don't know where we go from here, but I'm in. We're going to figure it out together. I would also want them to feel safe. And that would require me to be a very active listener. I would be anxious just talking about that. So that might be a message to our leadership, that even somebody who has a swath of experience when it comes to addiction and substance misuse, it would be a conversation I would be uncomfortable having. But you need to start thinking about it because they chose you. And believe it or not, having leadership operate from that place of caring was a big part of how I was able to stay sober in the beginning, because I didn't feel all alone. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I don't care about my career. I don't care about whether or not I get fired. I just want to learn how to be happy again. There's still a part of us that needs that connection. We get close to the people we work with, and it's part of our identity. And it was very important that I knew that somebody in leadership was willing to be a leader. So we do have resources. If you have been chosen and someone does choose you to reach out to you for help, it's okay to tell them, I don't know how the heck we're going to do this, but we're going to figure it out together. And some of what you're doing, Stephanie, with the CBP resiliency and the substance misuse program, that's a great start. We're starting to build a foundation to build upon. I think clearly there's still a lot of work to do, but if you can help these that type of situation and help a leader find the resources they need, I think we're on the right path. I hope this is a conversation that's just beginning. I hope if I'm asked to come back for a follow-up, it'll get easier for us, and maybe we'll continue to be a place, or maybe just be able to deliver a message that resonates with somebody out there that's needing help. Because if we can reach just one of us and get them on a path to their own solution, then it's all worth it. And you can't measure that data. We won't be able to. We won't be able to present that because we just won't know. But I know what's not working, and that's the way we handle substance misuse in our agency. It's not until the consequences are on board. We're great at consequences. We got that dialed in, and that needs to be part of the solution. Don't get me wrong. There has to be consequences. But we need to get better at everything else when it comes to holding space for somebody to find their path to getting well and learning how to be happy again. Because that's what I want. I just want to be happy. It's been my experience working with several of my brothers and sisters in this uniform in U.S. Border Patrol. When someone gets it and their program starts working in their life, that sends out ripples, and when the agents around them see somebody truly make that transformation, and they start to not just tell you, I feel pretty good, they start acting like it, and it gives everyone else permission. Who doesn't want a piece of that? Who who doesn't want what he or she has? And yeah, it's an amazing effect. And if we can just reach one, that's immeasurable. We won't know how that manifests. We don't know what those ripples look like when they hit the shore. And I see a lot of top-down messaging, especially most recently when we're dealing with a health crisis. When I hear department level leadership saying your health is our number one priority, well, mental health has to be part of that conversation, not just our physical health. And I would argue that if we begin with the mental health issues within, our workforce, it will translate well into our physical health. And we have to remove that stigma that mental health means you're somehow broken, or it's a question of morality or bad decision making. Well, our minds are subject to fail just like any other organ in the body. And when they become subjected to addiction, addiction doesn't discriminate. There are some great examples of some great minds out there that have fallen and been on their knees with this stuff. And we have to remove that stigma from it and just look at it simply from a health perspective. We want our leaders to succeed. When leadership's winning, we're all winning. And if you can convince us that you care for us, we'll carry you through the mission every time. We just want to know we're being cared for.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Living in Recovery. If you or someone you know needs help, reach out to the Employee Assistance Program to reach a licensed professional counselor at 1-800-755-7002. For additional resources related to the Substance and Alcohol Misuse Prevention Program, please visit the CBP Wellness and Resilience Programs page on CBPNet. You can also send questions directly to CBP Resilience at cbp.dhs.gov.